Welcome back to the Caribbean American Forum. I'm your host, Rick Burke. I'm talking to Kirsten Foy and Walter Mosley, two young African American leaders who are running for office in the city. Kirsten, you're running for the city council. We have a number of other young people. I know Mercedes I think it's the 35th, who's also running. It's encouraging to see so many young people answering the call to public service, as we said in the introduction. What do you think is the charge for young leaders, particularly African American leaders, in the 21st century, particularly here in New York City?
We have several charges. First and foremost, we have got to create an environment of excellence for succeeding generations. Walter spoke about education. For me, there are three critical crises areas that we must deal with, we must engage in order to kind of arrest and reverse many of the trends. First and foremost, we've got to talk about education. Mayoral control, for all intent and purposes, has been a failure. Not because the idea did not have value, but because the mayor that we empowered to control our schools has taken the spirit of mayoral control and juiced it up with steroids and has made it solely about his political vision for 1.1 million New York City students, as opposed to trying to address a bureaucracy that is, half the size of the city budget, in such a way that we are empowering parents and empowering local schools and communities to deliver the education. Right now, our schools and our parents are disempowered in the process.
But on that point, I'm sorry to cut you, but can you address, because you'll be running for the city council, and if you get elected, you'll have to address this point. People are complaining that throughout the minority community, especially high schools, are closed. Canarsie High School, South Shore High School, Tilden High School, Erasmus High School, and high school kids have to travel miles. Some of them have to get up at 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning to get to the schools that they're assigned. Do you think that's bad public policy? Why are they closing these schools instead of ensuring that they become passing schools, ensuring that they have equipment, the correct equipment in the schools, ensuring that they have the right teachers, the right principals, the right administration? Right. Do you think we have to have a choice of closing schools to ensure that kids pass?
It's a false paradigm that the mayor has established. Either we close these schools, we shut them down completely, we dislocate students, we dislocate staff and education professionals. Either we do this or we allow a school to continue to fail. That's a false choice. That's a false paradigm. What we need to be doing is looking at these schools, partnering with parents, partnering with the schools, figuring out what the problems are, figuring out how to empower these schools, how to empower these parents. This mayor has said we can't do this alone. This must be a partnership between the community and the Department of Education of the city. Well, a partnership means that all parties at the table have a voice, all parties at the table can contribute, and all parties at the table are equally invested. That's not what we have here. What we have here is a mayor who has said, I'm going to tell you what's best for your children, and then I'm going to criticize you for not going along with what my prescription is. And so we cannot, with that kind of mentality, with this kind of formula, we cannot address the problems that are facing our schools. Give you a prime example. We talk about the culture in the NYPD and how we've got to address that culture. Well, there's a culture in the Department of Education, formerly the Board of Education, that we have to address. I am not here to defend poor teaching. I'm not here to defend a poor, inefficient bureaucracy. But what I am here to say is that there's enough blame to go around, but there's also enough resources and enough brilliance and enough intellect to go around that we can all come up with a solution and not just be the vehicles for the dictate of an autocratic mayor. But to move beyond education, the second thing we've got to deal with is the criminal justice system. And that's broken down into two parts. You know, we talk about police accountability, and rightfully so. We have to talk about community accountability. You know, when we are the number one perpetrators of crime against ourselves, we've got a problem. We've got a problem that we can't just lay at the foot of Ray Kelly or at the feet of the mayor. This is a problem we've got to deal with internally. We've got to clergy, teachers, community leaders, parents, just you know, members of the community at large have got to say we are invested in our children and we are invested in their future. When we've got young African American and Latino men who are targeting each other, when we have violence be the order of the day in many of our communities, we cannot simply point fingers externally and say, NYPD, get your act together, while we are not holding ourselves accountable. You know, stop and frisk is a bad policy, but what's even worse is a community that refuses to stand up for itself. So we say to the police, stop harassing us. We say to the police, stop abusing us. We say to the police, fight crimes and solve crimes. But we say we're not going to participate because we're not snitches. We're not going to tell you who's responsible for XYZ crime because we're not snitches. What we don't want to do is participate with the police in solving crimes and creating a real fabric of public safety. What we want to do is point fingers and say, cops, you get your stuff together, but you know what? We're not going to participate in the process of creating public safety ourselves. And really quickly, the third thing is employment. We cannot expect young people in this society, in this city, to equally participate without giving them equal access to employment. We have got to empower them, and we have got to work overtime to create the kind of environment which creates jobs in communities that have largely been ignored by our mayor.
Yeah, let me follow up with Walt on that. Now, at the state level, many legislators have argued that enough resources don't come back into the community. We pay taxes with regard to even the prison system and how funds are allocated. There's a school of thought that says the funds from the federal government go to counties, and many inmates occupy counties, jails in counties upstate. Right. And when they are released from incarceration, they come back into the city, but the funds actually go to those counties upstate. Correct. So all around, the urban centers are starved for funds. What do you think the state legislature needs to do to, one, ensure that there's enough resources coming back to the city to spur economic development so that you can create the opportunities so that young people can have jobs? Any scientist will tell you that when there's jobs, there's a decrease in crime. So there's a direct correlation. And two, how do we foster social transformation? And how do we give funding to like non-for-profit, faith-based organizations to ensure that they're molding young people, that they're rehabilitating young people? And that's that sort of thing. Is that something that you have on your agenda to fight for increased resources to come back to our community to promote these kinds of initiatives?
Well, I think one of the things that you're talking about has in part been addressed. I know that in the legislature they passed legislation into law when Governor Patterson was in office, where they initiated legally where prisoners were to be counted. Although they're being housed upstate, they were to be now counted where they're from. Mm-hmm. And that, in a small part, deals with some of the issue in terms of resources being misappropriated for upstate residents when that representation is really a facade, or it's false, or it's shallow. Where the real representation is really in the downstate region, where unfortunately these inmates are coming from. Two, the one thing I tell people is that we're on a time clock. You know, the census for 2020 is fastly approaching us. It seems like we just completed the last census.
Exactly.
And one of the things that we all know about in the census is that numbers equate to resources. And, 7.5 years will come like this. It'll be on us before we know it. And as a result, the one thing that I tell people is the only way we're going to continue, and this is where the unique relationship between the African American community and the Caribbean American community come into play, because clearly without the Caribbean American community, we would not have nearly the level of representation at the city council level, at the federal level, or at the state level, given the added population Island Nation residents have given to Central Brooklyn in particular. But understanding that, we also have to be mindful of the fact that as much as certain segments of our community is growing, certain segments of our community is leaving, whether it's through attrition, whether it's through the fact that they just can't live here any longer, whether the fact they can't find affordable housing, decent affordable housing for their families to raise them in a safe environment. And as a result, what we need to do is do twofold. One, we need to find creative ways to come up with how do we build affordable housing, whether it's for our seniors, which is a growing population, a population that's living longer, that to be honest is a population that's been neglected for several years. We need to find housing for our veterans, which, going back 10 plus years with veterans who fought in Iraq, in Desert Shield, Desert Storm, in Afghanistan, and even those who are aging who fought in the Korean War. This is a growing population that needs assistance, that needs housing. And then obviously, back when I was growing up, I grew up in Mitchell-Lama Housing, which was a state subsidized program started in the mid-50s. The city and the state, with assistance from the federal government, need to come up with ways of coupling monies and resources for the state to get back into the business of creating affordable housing. It's something of a taboo now. The governor says he wants to put New York back in business. Well, you're only as good, your business is only as good as the people who you're allowed to hire. And if there's no one here to hire because they can't find housing, then how good is the business that we're going to be in terms of representing the state of New York? So obviously we want to make sure that that is a priority. And last but not least, when we talk about job creation, obviously we want to talk about building the capacity of small businesses, women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses. But the only way we're going to continue to do that and meet the governor's scope of 20% participation as relates to these mega construction projects is that if we start to build capacity. The only way we're going to start to build capacity is if we get lending institutions to invest in our state, invest in our communities, invest in our small business owners, so that we can create the type of surge in job creation that's needed for our young folks, needed for our innovative minds who want to have their own business, for our kids, or for our women who want to have their own business and want to hire from within, so that we can have a burgeoning community, a burgeoning economy. But for us to continue to go down the road of saying we want to have X number of minority women-owned businesses on these jobs, but yet we don't have the teeth to go along with it, is only an empty promise.
You touched on affordable housing. I'm not even sure if there's such a concept now. One of the things that when I worked in the city council, my former boss, David Yaski, pushed for is for any new development in the city to have at least 33% of affordable housing component. Do you think that this is something that should be implemented at the state level as well? And do you think Mayor Bloomberg has a policy of freeing up unused city lands to make sure that we have housing? Do you think this should also be a policy that should be adopted at the state level? Because obviously we are in a housing crisis and have been for years.